program. My name is Phil Ziegler. I teach systematic theology here in the department. Many of us who are on the staff are here. Some are bedecked in funny outfits. Others are more prudent and have come in normal clothes. But we're all here to welcome you to the start of the new term. You might have been expecting Professor John Swinton to be here, the Master of Christ College, who would usually preside at this event. He is, as is his way, traveling around the globe, speaking about the things that he knows so much about at the minute. So he sends his apologies to you all. He's sorry not to be with us, and he's asked me to stand proxy for him. Just a couple of housekeeping things to start. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, we should probably actually leave the building. There are two ways to do that here, and if you could spill out into the quad and then out to the street, that would be ideal. At the conclusion of the lecture, we'll be gathering in the quad for a photograph of folks attached to the Divinity Department. This year we have a photographer, I think, from the university who's going to try to capture our likeness for posterity. So you're more than welcome to come and join us for that on the steps in front of the chapel. Hopefully that won't take too long. And when that's over, you're all more than welcome to come and join us in the Divinity Library up on the first floor here, just in the quad for a reception. There's drinks and nibbles and bits and pieces, and that should take us through till shortly after 5 o'clock. So that's the program for the afternoon, such as it is. I wanted to say a few things before I introduce our lecturer about Christ College, and indeed just about the department. The history of this will be known to some of you, but perhaps not to all. The Divinity Department as it exists now is the product of 3 separate institutions who have found their way together over time. King's College, where we're stood at the minute, is a place where divinity has been taught since the foundation of the university in 1495. Marshall College, now in the center of town, the massive granite building, which is the town hall. Marshall College, founded in 1593 by the Newtown upstarts who weren't pleased with what was going on here in the old town by way of university education at that point. They too decided that divinity should be taught in their institution, and so it has been since that time. The third institution is Christ College, after whom this opening lecture is named. It's established in Aberdeen in the middle part of the 19th century as part of the educational work of the Free Church of Scotland, the Free Church emerging from the so-called Great Disruption, capital G, capital D, of 1843, which saw the national kirk split into 2 large groups. The Free Church reinvented all of its theological educational institutions from scratch, including one in town here, which was called Christ College. It eventually built itself a premises, which you can still see. It's on Offord Place, just beyond the Holborn Junction. So if you're wandering downtown, you can pick it out because it now holds the college bar, which is appropriate in some way, and also the dance club called Babylon, which is also appropriate. And the college itself is on the left-hand side of the street as you're walking west. On the north side of the street is a low building that used to house the university, or the Christ College Library. That library, the contents of that are currently held here in our Divinity Library itself. So those buildings are there, but Christ College itself came in with the Divinity Department here at the university after 1929, when the Free Church and the Church of Scotland were reunited. King's and Marshall College had previously been put together already in 1860 in a move that formed what is now the University of Aberdeen. Christ College continues today, despite the fact that it doesn't exist as a separate physical entity. Its chief purpose remains the support and oversight of the preparation and formation of ministerial candidates for the Church of Scotland here in Aberdeen. But its resources are and have been and continue to be much more broadly used for the support of the teaching of theology and religion in this place, and to enhance the life of the department, not least by the provision of the Divinity Library and the Divinity Librarian, support for faculty posts. Our colleague Katie Cross is currently in a post sponsored by Christ College, her lectureship in practical theology, as well as student prizes and awards. Some of you who excel in your work will find at the end of the year that you have checks and book tokens pushed into your hands by the good folks from Christ College. This opening lecture too is a legacy from the work of Christ College, and we're grateful to the college for all that it does. Joel Pierce, who's been instrumental in organizing today's events, and will no doubt be the one who's trying to corral us all for the photograph in due course. Joel is the administrator of Christ College, and so we're grateful to him for his work on this event, and indeed for helping to oil the wheels of all the work that Christ does throughout the year for us. So maybe just preemptively, let's give him a clap. So. Right, so that's me channeling John Swinton not very well. Now let me channel John Baer even less well. Professor John Baer is our head of department. He too is doing the things that John Baer does, which is to travel the world to speak, in his case, about all things patristic. He's sorry too not to be able to be with us, but he asked that I say something like the following. Let's see. Oh yes, right. I am to warmly welcome you all to this event and to the new academic year in divinity in general. I am to remind you how really rather good, quote unquote, our Aberdeen Divinity Department is, and how thrilled, with an underline, all of us in the department are to be able to be with you in the classroom for this new term, exploring all the rich and important subjects and questions which our discipline encompasses. Welcome to our community, he says, and to each and every one of you, best wishes for success in the new term ahead. So I hope I did John some justice there. You'll have to imagine that delivered with eloquence and wit. Okay, speaking of eloquence and wit, our lecturer for today. Our lecturer for this year's opening lecture is the Reverend Dr. Emma Percy, who joined us in January as senior lecturer in feminist theology and ministry studies. Emma was schooled at Oxford and at Durham and trained for the Anglican priesthood in the early 1990s, into which she was ordained in 1994, being one of the first of the cohorts of women who were ever admitted into the priesthood of the Church of England. She holds a PhD from the University of Nottingham. She worked for many years as a fellow and chaplain at Trinity College at Oxford. Her scholarship has found expression in many ways, including the publication of several books bearing titles such as these: Mothering as a Metaphor for Ministry, What Clergy Do, Especially When It Looks Like Nothing, and also, most recently, a volume which she co-edited with Ian Markham called The Study of Ministry, the subtitle of which is A Comprehensive Survey of Theory and Best Practice. It runs to 800 pages, so it is, I can attest, a comprehensive survey. It's a real pleasure for us to have Dr. Percy to speak to us here today and to deliver this lecture, the title of which is almost as good as the title of her book, What Clergy Do, Especially When It Looks Like Nothing, and that is If Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things. Would you welcome Dr. Percy?
You'll see as I go on that I just pinch the titles of books that I like to title things. One of the things that I have learnt over the last couple of weeks is that you should really ask more questions when people ask you to do things. I had worked out that Christ College was something to do with the historic training of Church of Scotland clergy. So when Joel said to me, will you do the annual Christ College lecture, I thought, oh yeah, that's going to be for a bunch of Church of Scotland clergy. That feels very comfortable. Yeah, I'm sure I can just pull something out for that. And then people started to kind of speak to me. And suddenly I realized that I'd signed up to something entirely different. So here goes. We will, luckily, the title is nicely kind of thing. Welcome. So as Phil so kindly said, my background is as a practical theologian and as a feminist practical theologian, also with a very strong interest in ministry studies. And so what I'm going to do in this lecture today is just a little bit of practical theology in a sense. So practical theology begins with experience. So it begins with looking at experiences in life, and then it proceeds to reflect and interrogate that using different partners to help in the thinking. So we're going to have a couple of stories to start with, and then actually I'm going to be using the Jewish German-American political philosopher Hannah Arendt as a conversation partner, and then we'll see where we go. Okay, so the first story. When my first son was born, he caught an infection during labor. And so he was taken away from me and he was taken up to the neonatal intensive care unit. He was put on intravenous antibiotics and luckily responded very well. And by the second day, I was told I could actually start to breastfeed him myself. And luckily, it all went very well. It doesn't always, but in this case, it all went very smoothly. And after a few days, I was told that I was able to take this baby down to be on the ward with me. And one of the nurses, as they kind of settled me in, baby in the basket next to me, the cot next to me, handed me a chart. And she said, "This is your feeding chart." And the chart had two columns. One was time and one was quantity. And I looked at this chart and I said to her, what am I supposed to put in the quantity category? And she looked at me and she said, well, just put down how long each feed is. Now I'm quite task orientated. So I dutifully, every time I picked up the baby and fed it, I filled in how long the baby had fed for. And I was a little disappointed because nobody seemed to be checking my chart. I was doing it so beautifully. Nobody was filling it. And eventually one of the midwives was coming around and I said to her, "Do you not want to look at my feeding chart?" And she laughed. She laughed and she said, "You cannot tell how much milk a breastfed baby has had by how long it's fed for." And as I learned more over the time about one of the miraculous things about breastfeeding is that actually you make two different kinds of milk. You make a kind of thin, watery foremilk, which quenches the baby's thirst, and a rich hind milk. And actually the baby controls how much milk it gets by how it sucks. Sometimes it wants a lot of watery milk, sometimes the rich. It goes on. And it can take an awful lot in a short feed and spent ages feeding and really not very much going on. So I put away the chart. So that's one of my stories. The other comes from when I was in parish ministry. And the church where I was a vicar, we delivered a quarterly parish magazine around the parish, which meant that once a quarter, we had the magazine compilation morning. This meant that nothing else could happen in the hall, so any income was forfeited for that day. And a whole group of people got together to put this magazine together. They were mostly in their 70s and 80s. It's a whole way of doing it. Bob was one of the people who understood the long-handled stapler and how to get the staples in. Pam was a dab hand at the elastic bands around the bundles, and a whole morning would ensue. And at the end of it, we would have the piles of the magazines ready to go out. There was coffee at mid-morning and a satisfied air when all was completed. The job could have been done probably more efficiently, certainly cheaper, by fewer people in different ways. But it was an important fixture in the calendar of the parish. I've called this lecture, "Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things." I admit I simply pinched the title from a novel, which I don't know if anyone has read, by John McGregor. It's a beautiful novel. This lecture has absolutely nothing to do with the book, apart from the fact that the book is just a wonderful evocation of kind of the ordinary and the everyday, and McGregor has a real skill at doing that. And it is the ordinary and the everyday that I am interested in. I'm going to use Hannah Arendt as a conversation partner as I reflect on these things. Hannah Arendt, German, American, Jewish political philosopher, and I'm particularly looking at her work, The Human Condition, which was published in 1958. We've just had in the university a whole interdisciplinary conference on Hannah Arendt, so I can't decide whether that's made me more scared to use her because I'm aware about how little I know, or just more confident because some of the lectures were so wacky that I thought if they can do that with Arendt, you know, we can do anything. Hannah Arendt gave the Gifford lectures. You'll learn about the Gifford lectures in time, very important part of the events here in Aberdeen about 50 years ago. But this is just a funny aside. The conference that we just had this picture of Arendt on all of the booklets, and the university events made us reprint them all with a picture without her smoking because it's not considered, oh yes, not considered good to do that. Hannah Arendt, in The Human Condition, separated human activity into three different realms. So the first is the realm of laboring. So the realm of laboring is all about the necessities of life, the things that need to happen for life to continue, the growing of food, the feeding of the body, the sustenance of life. And this realm of human activity is repetitive. It can be done collectively. Any productivity is not lasting, but fed into the process of life. It's part of the private realm, the oikos, the household. And this is a quote from her. Whatever labor produces is meant to be fed into the human life process almost immediately. And this consumption, regenerating the life process, produces or rather reproduces new labor power needed for the further sustenance of the body. The second realm of activity she calls either fabrication or work. She uses the same word different times. Fabrication is the making of things. Here, the end justifies the means. Tangible products are made that can outlast the maker. There are blueprints, targets, individual workers who delegate. She says, to have a definite beginning and a definite predictable end is the mark of fabrication, which through this characteristic alone distinguishes itself from all other human activities. And her third realm is action. Action is the realm of politics, the world of speech and interaction, the place where people think and where new ideas arise. This is the public realm, the polis. And she says, action as distinguished from fabrication is never possible in isolation. To be isolated is to be deprived of the capacity to act. Action and speech need the surrounding presence of others no less than fabrication needs the surrounding presence of nature for its material and a world in which to place the finished product. Action and speech are surrounded by and in constant contact with the web of acts and works of other men. Arendt was particularly interested in the world of action, the realm of politics, the world in which intellectuals could speak together. She recognized the need of the other realms, but is very concerned when they are over-prioritized. This is not where she considers we are genuinely human. It's fair to say that her sense of action is somewhat elitist. And, you know, she's not alone in that, in thinking that the real important human activity is in the intellectual sphere. She notes that where people have the means to outsource the labouring work, the necessities of life, the everyday practicalities, then they do. And they outsource them to women, servants, and in the past to slaves. So this is, if you can get yourself a decent wife to do all of the necessities, then actually you can get out there and do your thinking. I'm aware that we've moved in different times and some people are leaving for caring tasks, so whatever. Now, I think we can all agree that it is easier for us to engage in intellectual thinking, writing, and speaking if someone else is looking after the necessities. And I've been grateful for the help that I have and do have in those things. Yet, I think that Arendt's dismissal of the necessities, a sense that they are kind of, in a sense, not where we see important things about what it is to be human, is problematic. I want to say that there is a lot that I find helpful, though, about what Arendt gives to us. As one of the speakers at the last conference said, her distinctions are helpful. And one of the main ways I find her distinctions helpful is that I think they can make it more straightforward for us to understand why it's problematic when language of about targets, efficiency, and outcomes get used to talk about things that are really in that realm of labouring and necessity. When we start to use the wrong model of how we assess things, we actually end up with things that are quite problematic. As Arendt noted, labouring may well produce things, but these are fed into the business of living, so very different from the things that are made to last. When the labouring activity is judged by the criteria of fabrication, all that is happening may actually get lost, and many things may go unnoticed when there is a fixation on the end result. And this may mean that the activity is undervalued and under-narrated, and perhaps even that the wrong ways of doing things get overemphasized. Over the years, I have seen how language from certain business models that really are shaped by that fabrication kind of way of thinking have been used to try and attempt to measure the outcomes of, for instance, the practice of parish ministry, which is something that I've been involved in. This has contributed to levels of frustration and even depression amongst the clergy, and there is little evidence that it has improved their role or even helped in actually deciding what it is that they're supposed to doing. One of the problems, if you're looking for kind of measurable outcomes, is what do you count and what does it tell you? I've seen forms that can record whether the parish minister has visited the school and how many times. And I feel it's a little bit like that feeding chart I was initially with. It's really helpful. You know how many times the minister went into the school. What's really interesting is, what did people get out of his being there? Did he actually feed people? Was there something nourishing? When I was talking to a group of bishops about this, and they said, well, how can you know those things? I said, we put a questionnaire out amongst the children. Are they excited when X is coming in? What do the staff look like when they're told that this is happening? There are ways we can look at them, but they are very different. Like the chart I was given to show how much food the baby was receiving, it simply tells you how often I had fed him. And we see this in other walks of life. A care worker in an old people's home could be measured on how quickly she gets through washing a number of adults each morning. But does this show us whether she cares? And is that something that is helpful? The work of labouring is as much about how things are done as what is done, and the incidentals, the things that happen around it. may be as important as the activity. In the realm of laboring, of dealing with the necessities of life, the end does not justify the means. Above all, we find it is about relationships. How do people relate to the people that we're working with? The feeding chart given to me presumed that how much milk the baby ingested was the only thing that mattered. And that could make sense if you were formula feeding a baby and you needed to actually plan for how much you needed. There were reasons why it might be helpful information. But it didn't recognize so many of the other things that were going on in the process. Yes, it was about sustenance and nutrition. The primary purpose is to feed the baby, but there are lots of other things that are happening. There are all sorts of kind of hormonal things that are going on that are of benefit both to the baby and to the mother. But above all, one of the really key things is that the baby has to be held, and it has to be held in a particular position. And we find that actually what's important about that position is that the distance that a newborn can focus is exactly the distance between where its head is and its mother's face when it's feeding. And so we find that actually that is part of what is needed. And knowing these things help us to understand that when a child is fed in a different way, it still needs to be held. And it needs to be held at that kind of space because actually the other things that are going on matter. We know that what is referred to as the unskilled work of carers, we know that in that work, we do not necessarily want the carer who is able to wash the most people the quickest. We actually want the one who does it with kindness, respect, who remembers the different preferences and fears of those they're caring for. We want someone who attends to the individual, who personalizes the care. That's what's really valuable. The ones who can wash someone with dignity, which I would say is a genuine skill. When I reflect on my example of the magazine collation, what really mattered there was about the value of bringing those people together and the fact that they absolutely saw themselves as necessary for the task. At a stage in life where they could often feel useless, they had purpose, and the enterprise depended on them. Incidental to the work of putting together the magazine were the conversations, the sharing of news and concerns, the strengthening of community. It could have been done more efficiently, but so much would have been lost. The anthropologist Abby Day, plug, Abby Day's coming up in November, and do come along and meet her and hear her. She's doing various things for us. Abby Day did a real study going and spending time with older women in Anglican churches and studying what she called Generation A. And this is just a description of one of the things that she experienced. It's a bit of a long quote, so bear with me. On another occasion, she says, I noticed the same phenomenon of overstaffing. I've been asked to help out in the kitchen where women were creating plates of food. Each person was slowly and methodically arranging one plate at a time with pate, pickle, lettuce, peppers, and kale. This could be done more quickly. I mentioned to the woman next to me, if we created a sort of assembly line. She looked at me a little quizzically and said she thought it was working fine as it was. I seemed to be the only one concerned with work efficiency. But it was also the case that I appeared to be the only one without a distinct task. Perhaps, I offered, I could tear the lettuce. Soon I was fully integrated into the work group and found myself laughing with them about small consequential details. Could we really send that plate out without another leaf of purple? Did it look unfinished without a curl of red pepper? A few children were elbowing into the kitchen wanting to help, and suddenly it all seemed crowded, chaotic, and strangely calm all at once. And that's when I finally realized something important. Everyone was happy. They were chatting to each other, laughing, helping with the task here and there. And no one seemed to notice or care that they could have got the job done in half the time with half the people. The midwife who laughed at my feeding chart told me that we need to look at the baby to see if it is being adequately fed, housed, and nurtured. And this is true within the world of necessity and labouring. The question that we need to look at is, are the people being served, are the people being cared for actually flourishing? Is the way that things are being done making people feel happy, valued, connected? Not efficiency, but flourishing. Focusing on the wrong type of activity can actually undermine people's confidence. If they're not rewarded for the kindness, the conversation, and dignity with which they do these things, if they end up actually being penalized for taking the time to chat, and this is labeled as unnecessary to the task, then we end with tasks completed, but relationships undermined. The danger is that the service only meets some of the needs of the ones being cared for. Efficiency, appropriately getting things done may be part of this, but it should not be the driving force. Labouring work needs to allow for the interruptions, the responsive interwoven with the planned. I find it interesting to note that in the parables of Jesus, there is a call to attend to the labouring work. Farmers sowing seeds, shepherds tending their flocks, women making bread or sweeping floors. We're told that these have something to say to us about how we understand God and how we should behave to each other. Traditionally, as Arendt notes, labouring has been left to women, servants and slaves. Listening to their experiences and their perspectives, both the hard work and the toil, but also the possibilities of community, can teach us things about how we understand God and how we behave to each other. Arendt is interested in the human capacity to speak and act together. And this she describes in her realm of action, the public space. Here it is that she notes the unpredictable nature of human interaction, recognizing the plurality of human understanding and the capacity that that offers for creativity, what she calls natality. This, she says, needs the ability to make and keep promises and the capacity to forgive and be forgiven. What, though, I think she fails to acknowledge is that it is in the realm of necessities, the domestic, the mundane, everyday living, that we as humans learn how to speak and how to relate, how to make and keep promises, and how to forgive and be forgiven. How we are cared for and how we learn to care will be about attitudes alongside actions. I'll put in a quote that I'm not using, so we'll go on to that. Nell Noddings, who writes extensively on the ethics of care, says, it's at home that we learn or fail to learn to care for people, animals, plants, objects, and ideas. And she says that this is about learning how to respond to needs, to recognize needs and respond to them. Instead of the usual connotations of responsibility, answerable, accountable, liable, we're interested in cultivating the ability to respond appropriately. The person is not merely dutiful and dependable, but capable of the response desired or needed. And I note again that sense that response means that we need to value being interrupted. If the realm of necessity is devalued and the work of labouring is presumed to be unskilled, unfulfilling, suitable only for those of low status, then it becomes difficult to recognise and value when it is done well. If the people doing it are discouraged from seeing it as worthwhile, then this impacts how it is done and how it is received. There is much that is banal and repetitive in the world of necessities. Don't get me wrong, I am not here trying to romanticize housework or caring duties. But that does not mean that they cannot be fulfilling, meaningful, and sometimes pleasurable. And above all, it is in the realm of labouring that we work collectively. And I wonder whether perhaps this is one of the reasons for failing to speak about the importance of the realm of necessities, because this is the area of our life when we are most aware of our vulnerabilities. It is, Arendt notes, the realm in which we are aware of our mortality, where we handle pain and death. When poverty makes daily living a task of survival, subsistence, then human vulnerability is all too apparent. Yet even when life is less precarious, this is the realm where we deal with our bodily needs, and where for most of us, we recognize and interact with the bodily needs of others. This is the realm in which we negotiate changing needs as we grow from infant to adult and into older age. This is where we experience times of illness or other upsets, which might mean we need care. In a wider world that values independence and autonomy, the reality of our complex interdependence is too often under-narrated. Drawing on the work of psychologist Daniel Stern, amongst others, the practical theologian Bonnie Miller-McLemore argues, people do not outgrow dependencies and attachments. They differentiate and learn more adequate ways of relating to others. Separation and independence then are not the primary developmental tasks that we supposed. Authentic individual development proceeds only by affiliation. The collective nature of the realm of labouring should draw us into relationships of intersubjectivity, in which we recognise both our own needs and the needs of others, and value mutuality even where there is inequality. Jessica Benjamin's work on the early relationship of mother and child focuses on the importance of recognition and of intersubjectivity. She writes, in this sense, notwithstanding the inequality between parent and child, recognition must be mutual and allow for the assertion of each self. Hence the need for a theory that understands the capacity for mutuality evolves, a theory based on the premise that from the beginning, there are always at least two subjects. We begin in relationships. As my first story reminds us, all human beings are born through a relationship, developing within and dependent on their mother's body, and then within the caring relationship necessary for life to flourish. And I note, just throwing in a bit of theology here, that the incarnation, we need to remember, begins in such a relationship, and that is significant. I noted earlier that in the breastfeeding, the distance between the baby's face and her mother's when she is at the breast is the exact distance that she can focus on. And so you find in that process, there is this looking and this recognizing and this getting to have a sense of each other. But also one of the fascinating things, as you can see, I'm quite interested in breastfeeding. One of the fascinating things about it as well is that the baby has a certain amount of autonomy, because actually you have to put the baby to the breast, but once there, it's actually the baby that's controlling what's going on. And that sense that there is this sort of, subjectivity from that point. Benjamin notes this cooperation as an example of actively engaging and making ourselves known in relationship to the other. The intersubjective view, she says, view maintains that the individual grows in and through the relationship to other subjects. I want to suggest that it is the very human fear of mortality and dependence that leads to the devaluing of those on whom we depend for the necessities. By suggesting that the work traditionally done by women and servants is menial and unskilled, of less value than the fabrication of things and the work of the public realm, we are, in a sense, saying that we can kind of escape from that world and we don't need to think about it. Seems that if we can overlook the importance of the work of labouring, we can perhaps forget our vulnerabilities. Alistair McIntyre notes that actually recognising our dependence is actually an important aspect of understanding what it is to be the kind of people who can practically reason. He writes, dependence on others is, of course, often recognised in a general way, usually as something that we need in order to achieve our positive goals. But an acknowledgement of anything like the full extent of that dependence and of the way it stems from our vulnerabilities and our afflictions is generally absent. We begin in relationship, and we continue to live in complex webs of relationships, and how we relate matters to how we and others can flourish. Christianity recognizes the importance of mutuality and interdependence. Consistently, we are called into relationship with the triune God and with our neighbors, learning what it means to love God and love our neighbors, recognizing our mortality and our dependence on God and interdependence on others, valuing community. Interestingly, Arendt notes that Christianity, she calls the one way of thinking that is worldlessness, because they're not looking for immortality in this world, but trusting in it beyond. And she says that this means Christians are concerned with the common good rather than the common world. Christians are called to work for the common good through service, which brings us into that realm of necessities and laboring. Caring for the least, including bodily caring, is to be an outworking of love and a manifestation of grace. We know that love has immortal value and helps to build the kingdom of God rather than the kingdoms of the world. Christians are called to be servants. Yet even within Christianity, the realm of necessities is often under-articulated, especially when it is the everyday experience of women and those denoted as unskilled. Feminist theology has noted that the valorizing of service and self-sacrifice has not always been helpful to women. Finding my right page. Attending to the realities of I'm grateful for a recent book. It's good because it's the last page, so you'll be relieved. I'm grateful for reading a new book by Emily Dumler-Winkler, which is a book called Bon Virtue, which has really introduced me much more fully to the work of Mary Wollstonecraft. I knew Mary Wollstonecraft from her vindication of the rights of women. But here in this book, Dumler-Winkler actually presents her as a Christian ethicist shaped by her dissenting church tradition. And one of the really useful things that Wollstonecraft gives us is she distinguishes between virtues and what she calls the semblance of virtues. And in these, we might see an end. So it might look as if this is a good thing, but actually, if how it's done actually doesn't have that true virtue, it isn't tied up, she says, with love and with justice, then we know it's just a semblance of virtue rather than a virtue. She gives the example of the difference between charity and benevolence. Charity is not a condescending distribution of alms, but an intercourse of good offices and mutual benefits founded on respect for justice and humanity. And she differentiates between that and kind of benevolence. And she encourages her readers to look for examples of virtues in unlikely places amongst the poor, the women, the marginalized. Taking mutuality seriously involves the recognition of the other as a fellow subject. Service that does this with rather than to is where we can learn from the other and develop a proper understanding of intersubjectivity. And this is why the realm of practical theology often begins here, often begins with looking at the experiences, perhaps of those who haven't actually had them well articulated, who haven't been listened to. How do we speak of lived experience which has gone unnoticed or unremarked? How can we use such experiences to understand the human condition, the Christian calling? And how can these perspectives enlarge our ideas about God and God's interaction with the world? This requires attention to the ordinary, noticing the incidentals, the ways of relating, speaking, I suggest, of remarkable things, listening to and giving voice to the experience of those who have often been marginalized. If theology is only done from the realm that Arendt calls action, of those who have the privilege of someone else doing the necessities for them, then I suggest it will, and perhaps on many occasions has, missed important perspectives. As a feminist theologian, I'm interested in women's bodily experiences, for me, particularly around pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing. And my reflections on breastfeeding, for instance, have informed my thinking about how humans relate. My understanding of a theology of grace, anyone wants to read that, I can give it to them, the kind of skills that we might need for thinking about ministry. The experiences that I've had in parish ministry, especially with older members, has helped me to see that efficiency is not always what is needed. That community is built up and maintained in small ways. That a sad truth for those who are preachers in the church is that the coffee time may be even more valuable than the sermon for teaching what it is to be like Christ. That experiences of working together, even if mundane, can strengthen a sense of worth and intersubjectivity. I thank Arendt for being a conversation partner, and I thank her for the distinctions which have helped me to reflect on these things. I value what she has to say about the worlds of fabrication and action, but I find that I want to talk about the world of necessity, because as Arendt herself says, each time we talk about things that can be experienced only in privacy or intimacy, we bring them into a sphere where they will assume a kind of reality which, their intensity notwithstanding, they never could have had before. So I suggest that in theology, we need to talk about the ordinary, everyday things to find that they are, in fact, remarkable. Thank you.
We take a couple of minutes for some questions and discussion, should we have them, before we decant to the club for the photos. Questions from the floor. Or we can engage in everyday things and carry on with our business and let the conversation run in the midst of all of that as well. Yes, please, Annie. Speak up.
Oh, I'll turn this one off. Okay.
That'll work then.
Is this better? Oh, yes, this is better. Wow, I really want to talk into this microphone. I'm just interested about the relationship between these different spheres, because obviously they're so overlapping, and you know the classic, like the home is a political space, or you know those sorts of what feel like aphorisms now. How does Arendt, or how do you think about talking about these spheres together, assuming that things aren't so cleanly, like we talk about efficiency in the work, like in the workplace, but then you go home and all of a sudden you have to maybe switch off efficiency mode and go into it. And so obviously it's not as clean, and in our bodies, it's not as clean. And then in our spaces, it's not as clean. I was thinking about just what it means for. Well, I was thinking about John and I read about site ontologies, so what it means to be in a particular place, and the overlapping kind of activities and practices in one place. And so I'm just curious on your thoughts on that.
Arendt doesn't really integrate them in a sense. I mean, she knows that they all have to happen, but she's a political philosopher, and she's her particular concern is when she feels things get pushed into the wrong place. So she has a real concern that an obsession with kind of society, the social, is a kind of bringing the home into the world of politics, and she wouldn't been in with a feminist pin badge. And a lot of what she was kind of critiquing was the age at her time, which she felt had lost the importance of the true political. You are right, and I think, you know, there are the ways of kind of looking at how we integrate them. I think, and in lots of ways we do, and in some of the stuff where I've used this when I've written about parish ministry, I talk about the fact that there is the kind of laboring, kind of sticking the chairs out, kind of, you know, et cetera, alongside, and there's the feeding, there's the kind of the services are what they are. They're services, you know, you are nurturing and feeding people. And alongside that, there is the building of the community, there is creating a community which has an aspect of the political and the things like that. So there is, of course, there is a sort of an integrating. But I think why I find it helpful is that I think sometimes this, just personally, I find sometimes distinguishing them out gives me a way of understanding. I mean, you know, I guess I've got colleagues here who might feel that, you know, it can be very difficult if actually you feel that that you're going to be measured, I mean, in the end, just on, you know, whether you've got the right number of books from the right kind of publisher on a shelf. And that is an outcome. It's important, but actually that whole balance between teaching, spending time with people, I mean, there are lots of ways of looking at it.
Perfect example, the one you just gave, of the question that I really have in terms of how it touches down, because what you just talked about was the middle category, fabrication, but actually that's held within larger structures, as in the ref would be one, which is a political structure. Another would be sort of the ways that we're trained to understand what a good CV is, which is more of a sort of communal ideal. But all of those obviously have, if you're laboring within those sort of political and teleoaffective structures, you're then of course, efficiency just becomes a sort of a thing. It's just a learned skill to mediate between the political and labor.
I think what I'm particularly interested in is the harm that's done to things like caring and things like this when this fabrication model is used. And I wrote a book called What Clergy Do When It Looks Like Nothing, which I just pinched the title from somebody who wrote a book called What Mothers Do When It Looks Like Nothing. And she talks about, and I saw it actually when I was working, I happened to be working in an area where there are a lot of professional women having their children in their kind of mid-30s and things like that, and who'd come from a kind of what she called a hurdle world of work, where they've been taught you do projects, you do things like that, and they were ill-prepared and deeply problematized by the fact that actually that doesn't work if you're bringing up children, and actually how that can undermine people, how it can add to kind of mental health problems and things like this. So I think that's why I find the distinctions helpful. And I think how we balance that is the interesting thing. How do we value the fact that efficiency, hard work, these things matter, but how do we also have a sense of what is it we want? I mean, we know we live in a world, you know, in this country where we have an aging population. We're desperately short of people who are going to care for them. And the way we talk about and the way we reward the people who do that kind of work that most of us don't want to do is to say that it is, you know, it's really nothing, you know. And I think that those are the things that disturb me. Yeah. Annie and I can go. Well, we should now go just have coffee later, Annie, and we'll talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. probably just bringing on the conversation on efficiency back into the parish ministry that you're interested in, that I'm interested in. It's a half-baked question, but I'm thinking about sort of numerical church growth ideas, and does it conflict? I mean, I don't think it's mutually exclusive, but it's almost like if you, I guess, spend as a quality quantity, perhaps almost question, and a theology of either or both. Yeah, so just, I guess you know what I'm asking.
Absolutely. And I think this is a very interesting thing, isn't it? And I think if you fixate on the quantity, so I think that a lot of the programs that have been introduced to kind of, particularly certainly in the UK, to combat decline, assume that there is a sort of methodology that can get the numbers up, and that's going to matter. I think that they tend to cause incredible demoralization and distress to the majority of clergy. And I think that having an understanding of the church as being about community, and having a realization that if people, I think my understanding of missiology would be that if people are genuinely building communities that genuinely model the life of Christ, then we would hope that would have a kind of a missiological effect, and that would draw more people in. But if we're just going for the numbers, I think that we will miss what matters. But I mean, I'm a fully signed up member of a denomination that is in decline. So, it's debatable.
Okay. Thank you so much, Emma. I've got a question from the chat, from the people who are online, which is going from the church focus to the academic. How can the space and scaffolding be made in this department of theology for transcending focuses on league tables, meeting targets for pastorates, grants, funding, publications, etc.?
Above my pay grade is definitely it. Do you know what, though? I mean, I'm a new member of this department, and I've come from a very different space. And the thing that I have been deeply, deeply encouraged and moved by here is that I experience so much support, encouragement, interaction, valuing of conversation, making time for each other, and understanding something very important about the interdisciplinary nature of the different things that we're studying, so that one of my colleagues who's been here a bit longer than I have was talking about somewhere else where he worked, and he said, oh, we were very much in our discipline, the people who did this kind of theology, and I haven't found that here. So yes, we live in the real world. The university has a financial model, and we want to be paid, and all of that hangs together into actually how you have to have patterns of doing things. But I think that what I really commend to all of you is that, a lot of how we do theology will be in the conversations and in the, trying things out, and other people in the coming together. And I've become, one of the other areas that I'm interested in doing reading and writing about at the moment is kindness. And kindness, which of course is actually about that sense of kinship and of belonging together and how we treat people. So I'm delighted to find that in Aberdeen Divinity Department, kindness is very, very present. That's a good note to end on, isn't it?
Thank you indeed, Emma, for the talk and for your generosity in the conversation. There'll be more of that to follow. First, photographs, then conversation, and only in that order. Joel, are there marching orders, or shall we all just roll out the door into the quad? Oh, okay. So rolling out the door into the quad with an eye for the photographer. And then as soon as that action is over, or for those of you who aren't keen to participate or not going to join the photograph,